Hello, everyone. So I wanted to introduce you to the next rig we will be working with. It's called Ultimate Pendulum, and we moved to here from the bouncing ball because it has essentially a joint chain in it. Technically, no joints were used in the making of this rig, I don't think, but the idea of there being sort of like an upper shoulder to an elbow to a wrist to a hand, etc. That is all inherent in here, and it's a nice stepping stone to get to before a human or humanoid character, because a human is basically like four of these on a torso. So a lot of the concepts that we use on that are going to be in here, but just simplified because there's only one of them. So I wanted to introduce a couple of just different concepts that we're going over here and show you some of the things. So first up, just like with the bouncing ball rig, there is a root control, a sort of a main control, if you will. At the base of this, it's shaped differently, and this is not meant to have keys on it. So just like before, this is meant for like placing things, meaning its initial position is going to be over here, or maybe we want it suspended because it's running along on a rail or something. Um, it also has a global scale on it, so if you need to match it to a prop, you can. And it has a few different pendulum types. So the normal one is this basic one. It's got a mace on it here, or the UFO version, which is pretty fun. But we're going to go back to the normal one just for now. So again, should not be placing keys on this. Also, you'll see that you can touch a little bit of the geometry. I'm not sure why. Normally, we can't do that. However, you can't change anything. So don't even bother. Please don't. They locked everything out for a reason. But the controls are these four things here. And we start off with the one, all right, they call it main control. And this is for if you actually want it to move around. So this is the initial position, and this is the, all right, it's starting here, and it's going to slide forward, and then it's going to like do a thing or whatever. That is this control. And you can see it doesn't actually have a lot of options here. You can't move it side to side. It's meant to be like moving along a rail or potentially moving up and down, and it can rotate in this direction. And that's it. And they do that on purpose because it's meant to have certain limitations on it. Now, I'll have another video that goes over how you could unlock things if you really needed to or wanted to. The other controls, which need a rotation tool, rotate from the various joints. And you can see that the pivot point for these controls is not where the control is. Now, a lot of rigs will have these controls right over the pivot point, but for various reasons, including the presence of this main control, these are actually in the middle. You click it, but then the manipulator is over here. Now, this is a very common thing in rigs where a control will be in one place, but the actual thing that you spin around will be somewhere else. And you'll see that these things are, where they're locked out, kind of. We can't change them, which means we can't key them. Same with this one, it's just a rotate X. Same with this one, it's just a rotate X. Those limitations are meant to make things a little bit clearer for you. So there's only certain motions you can make. So if you needed to shake, for instance, you would need to do, trembling in this direction. There's certain motions of like looking back and forth it cannot do right now. Again, this is why we're going to have a video on how to unlock things. But the main thing I want to go over here is the idea of a joint chain. And we've talked before about, we had there we go. Sorry, we're just going to duplicate this real fast. There we go. When we had the planets and such, we were grouping things together. We were giving this its own, orbit group by saying Control G to group it to itself. And then, moving the pivot points. So you guys are already a little bit used to, clicking on, whoops, good grief. You have to remember to get out of your move pivot point function before you click on something. So you guys are used to clicking on, a thing, you hit up on the keyboard and you get a pivot point over here. That's something you were doing in the solar system project. But this grouping something to itself and that phenomenon is a parenting phenomenon. This group, which I can call orbit, is the parent of the planet, right? So you have one thing that dictates how the other one moves, and another thing that can move all on its own independently. But if the parent is ever called up again, the child has to do what it's told. But the child does not take on any new things. So there's no rotations on this, right? Even though this has been moved, there's no rotations on it because it got its rotations and inherited its rotations from here, right? So this group influences this. It's the same thing for something like this, only it's a longer chain. And there's other bits in here, so you can see that there's groups and everything. But essentially, you can see how it goes from main to pendulum 3. Oh, it actually has this backwards, so we don't want to be looking at this. But basically, this is the ultimate parent of everything. They all follow. And then this is underneath there, and these are underneath this one. And you kind of work your way down the joint chain so that if you bend this, and then you're like, oh, wait, I need things to be straighter. You move this one, these two joints are still bent, right? Like they're still, they're not listening to this. Also, when I rotated this, you see that there's no rotation on that one or that one, but they have still moved. And so one of the things that happens is that if you have a goal in mind, if you want to have this touch this sphere in a certain way because it's going to punch it or something, you can sit there and figure out your angles and then go, oh, well, actually, I want this to be more bent, which means this has to move down and over. And then if you're like, oh, but I need this to be a little bit straighter, it's suddenly not touching it again. And this is very common with what we're calling FK joints, forward kinematics. We'll learn what the inverse is another time. But I want you to keep in mind that when it comes to forward kinematics, what that means is that everything higher up in the joint chain can change the placement of your hand, right? If this is the hand, I move any of these things, this location changes. And that's by design. Now, when you're trying to like line it up with something that it's trying to touch, that can be a lot to deal with because there's lots of moving things back and forth. And then if you suddenly decide, well, actually, this should be a little bit tilted, it's like, oh my God, now I gotta go in here, and then now it's too low, and that can be rough. But if you're trying to get a sweeping motion of some sort, you need this forward kinematics. And so most things that are arm-like have forward kinematics on. Again, there's an inverse kinematics. We will learn that later when we get to the biped rig. Let me delete this because we don't need it. So as before, our controls are the curves. You can, if you want to watch stuff without them, you can turn them off if you need to, turn them back on. Unfortunately, they're just called 1, 2, and 3, and frankly, I find those names to be backwards. I would prefer them to be 3, 2, 1, but I didn't make the rig. So you just have to keep track of what thing it is that you are moving in here, so that you know what you're dealing with on your graph editor. Now, that does mean that there will be 4 different things now in the graph editor, because we now, well, 4 different items with at least 4 different attributes. If I rotate, if I do anything else with that main, if I move it along the X or the Y, I will get another 2 things down here. So we're getting a little bit more complicated with how many curves you may have, moving in here. There we go, 1, 2, 3, 4. So a little bit more that we have to pay attention to. But otherwise, I just want you to get the feel for this forward kinematics, where one thing changes and we got to change everything else. If you've ever done any puppet animation, then you will know of this from, let's say it's parented stuff in After Effects or whatever. But otherwise, this is a little bit new. Um, yeah, oh, that's kind of a nice little wind-up pose right before it, hits into this. And this is why FK is so nice, because you can have this drag behind these more easily than the other way. The other way, which makes it easier to place, your foot on this ball, for example, it makes gentle swings like this kind of hard. So we can get a little bit more fluid animation out of this. All right, but this is our newest rig. Again, there's only 4 controls that we should concern ourselves with and very few attributes between them. And if you have any questions about, how to get stuff to move on here, please let me know.